You know the story we're always told about the Age of Discovery, right? It's pretty much a one-way street. Europe shows up, and the Americas are changed forever. But that's really only half the story. So today, we're flipping that script. We're going to dive into how the New World wasn't just discovered, it actually completely remade the old.
Okay, so just imagine for a second, you're living in 15th century Europe, and you read this. This is Amerigo Vespucci, describing the people he met. Now, to a society that was built from the ground up on hierarchy, on private property, on authority, this must have sounded like it was coming from another planet. It was this vision of a totally different way to be human, and it sent absolute shockwaves back home.
And that right there, that's the big question we're tackling. The impact on the Americas was, of course, devastating and world-altering. We know that. But what about the ripple effects that traveled back across the Atlantic? They would fundamentally change Europe's food, its entire economy, and maybe most importantly, its most deeply held beliefs about the world and even God.
So let's start with the most basic thing there is, food. Because before the 16th century, Europe was in a really tough spot. The encounter with the Americas didn't just introduce some new flavors, it arguably saved the continent from a constant, vicious cycle of starvation.
Life was just fragile. European grains like wheat had pretty terrible yields. Farmers had to set aside at least a fifth of every single harvest just to have enough seeds for the next year. So think about that. One bad harvest wasn't just one bad year. It could kick off a domino effect of hunger and poverty that could last for ages.
And this is where things get wild. Just look at this comparison. On one side, you've got your traditional European cereals with those really limited yields. And on the other, American maize, what we call corn. A single grain of corn could grow a stalk with several ears, yielding hundreds of new seeds. The math on this was just revolutionary. Suddenly, you could feed way more people, and you didn't have to save a huge chunk of your food just for planting. Corn was a game changer. It was this incredible buffer against famine.
But hey, if corn was a revolution, the potato, well, the potato was on a whole other level. It was first cultivated way up in the Andes, and this thing was so incredibly efficient it could feed the massive Incan Empire in that rugged mountain terrain. So when it finally gets to Europe, it fuels a population boom unlike anything the continent had ever seen. It's funny, right? We call it the Irish potato, but its roots are planted firmly in South America.
And the list, it just keeps on going. Tomatoes. I mean, can you even imagine Italian cuisine without them? Chocolate, which became the absolute cornerstone of Swiss identity. And of course, tobacco, a plant that would create entirely new global habits and economies. From the kitchen in Italy to the chocolatier in Switzerland, the very identity of Europe was being rewritten by these gifts from the Americas.
So, this revolution starts on the dinner plate, but it definitely doesn't end there. It spreads like wildfire to the financial centers of Europe. Because the Americas didn't just send food, they unleashed a torrent of wealth that would completely rewire the economic map of the world. So in the short term, it was pretty straightforward. Spain became ridiculously, fabulously wealthy. The gold and silver pouring in from its new colonies made it the superpower of the 16th century. For example, Emperor Charles V, he basically used American gold to pay off the massive debts he'd run up to get himself elected Holy Roman Emperor. But here's the crazy part, the real irony in the long run. Spain got so rich, so fast, that it just stopped making things. I mean, why bother with industry at home when you can just buy the best stuff from other countries? So, as you can see here, that American gold flows into Spain, and then it flows right back out to places like England and Flanders to buy their goods. In this really strange twist, Spain's colonial wealth ended up paying for the industrial rise of its own rivals, which eventually led to its own decline.
But you know, the most profound impact might not have been on Europe's plates or in its banks, it was in its mind. The discovery of the Americas didn't just challenge maps, it challenged the very foundations of European reality, theology, and identity. It was a crisis of the soul.
For 1,000 years, the European worldview was neat, tidy, and made perfect sense theologically. The world had three parts: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Theologians saw this as this beautiful reflection of the Holy Trinity, a sign of God's perfect, divine order. This wasn't just geography, it was a fundamental truth.
And then this happens. A fourth part of the world just appears, and it's a massive one. This wasn't just a simple update to the map, it was a full-blown intellectual crisis.
Think about it. If the most learned, most respected people in your world were completely wrong about something as basic as the shape of the planet, something they had tied directly to God, well, what else could they be wrong about? It was a crack in the very foundation of certainty.
And this crack led to some really disturbing questions. For instance, Christian belief held that the apostles had preached the gospel to the entire world. Okay, so how did they miss this place? And were the millions of people living here just condemned without ever even having a chance to hear the gospel? Or, and this was the most radical, dangerous thought of all, were the sacred stories about the apostles maybe not literally true?
This crisis of certainty, also funny enough, sparked some radical new ideas. Those glowing reports from Vespucci and others gave rise to this concept of the noble savage, the idea of people living in this natural, utopian state, completely free from all that European greed and corruption. This idea directly inspired thinkers like Sir Thomas More and his famous book Utopia, and it planted a seed of social critique that would just keep growing for centuries.
Now, the really crucial thing to get is that all of this wasn't happening in a vacuum. At the exact same moment Europe was trying to wrap its head around a new continent, it was also being torn apart by a religious revolution, the Protestant Reformation. And these two massive events, they weren't separate stories at all. They were deeply, deeply connected.
Just look at this timeline. It's the year 1521. Over in Germany, Martin Luther is standing before Emperor Charles V, defending the very ideas that would split the Christian world in two. And in that exact same year, thousands of miles away, Hernán Cortés conquers the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, unlocking its legendary wealth for that very same emperor, Charles V.
And that's the connection. This isn't just a coincidence. Charles V took the immense riches pouring in from the Americas and used them to fund his armies, to finance his political campaigns, all aimed at one thing: crushing the Protestant movement. The gold of the Aztecs was literally melted down to pay for the fight against the Reformation.
Which brings us to a really fascinating final question to think about. We often learn about the Reformation as the defining event of the 16th century. But when you step back and you consider the complete reshaping of Europe's food, its economy, its politics, and its entire worldview, you really have to wonder, which of these two world-changing events truly had the greater, more lasting impact on history? The Reformation or the discovery of the Americas?